And I think that Mr. Gülen and his Hizmet'e movement recognizes the pluralism as inevitable in the world and says, let us learn to live with that, rather than to imagine that we can stuff it all back in the box. My name is William Martin. I'm an Emeritus Professor of Sociology at Rice University and currently the Senior Fellow for Religion and Public Policy at the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy, also at Rice. I've been associated with members of the Hizmet'e movement for now 12 years, since about 2002. And as I've gotten to know individuals, particularly here in Houston, we have developed, I think, some real friendships and have gone to their homes during Ramadan. We've shared a number of meals at lunchtime at other situations. So I feel like I have some real friends whom I look forward to seeing and enjoy their interaction. Talking with people who will talk about the number of scholarships they have paid for, bursaries that they have paid for students, and to see people of very modest means and find out that they are supporting 25 or 50 or 100 students to go to the schools there. I'm just overwhelmed by the generosity of them, and also the kindness that I feel in response. So the idea that these are Muslims who are trying to do evil to you is incomprehensible to me. So I would say in that my experience has been one of great warmth and appreciation. And I value it. I think I have grown intellectually from that, and also grown personally, and my heart is larger and fuller for that experience. It seems to me that the Hizmet'e movement represents a very healthy alternative to many forms of, or many expressions of Islam that we see around the world, in which people are acting on the basis of what they believe to be authentic Islam. And a lot of that has very negative and destructive outcomes. And it seems to me that the Hizmet'e movement, as I have seen it, is much more modern. It's much more involved, particularly with education, which as an educator strikes me as very positive, and also with trying to interact with non-Muslims in Houston and elsewhere in a straightforward and healthy way. I have read some of Mr. Gülen's writings, but not a great many of them, as a matter of fact. Much of my impressions and knowledge of Mr. Gülen has come through members of Hizmet'e, his people who are attracted by his teachings and inspired by them. And so for that reason, I have a very positive view of Mr. Gülen. What I have seen, his emphasis on education, his emphasis and at least approval of engaging in the business world in a straightforward and significant way, and also in the importance of dialogue, and in the condemnation of violence. I'm also much impressed by my understanding that he believes that while religious people have a right to participate in government as equal participants, that he believes in essentially the separation of religion and government. We say in the United States, the separation of church and state. That my own feeling about this is that I've written about it and called it secular state, religious people, that religion is best able to flourish when the state itself is not governed by religion, where all people have an opportunity to practice their religion freely. The United States has done that, I think, in an exceptional way, not perfectly, but exceptional. And I say we can't say other countries should do this, but I think we can commend them to it and feel good about that accomplishment. I think that the Hizmet'e movement represents Islam, represents a very positive view of Islam, because it does not Islam historically produced some of the great science and saved some of the great science in the world. And instead of saying, well, we know all we need to know about science and let's stop studying it, the Hizmet'e movement has emphasized scientific education. That's very positive. I think it has also shown historically, the Jews and Christians were treated well. They were subordinate, but they were treated generally well in many Islamic countries. And now there is a greater emphasis on equality and dialogue with non-Muslims, which I think is quite positive. So it's basically entering into the modern world. The modern world is pluralistic. There's no getting around that. And the efforts to try to have everybody shaped into one way is bound to fail. It can exist in an authoritarian way for a time, but it does not hold up. And I think that Mr. Gülen and his Hizmet'e movement recognizes the pluralism as inevitable in the world and says, let us learn to live with that, rather than to imagine that we can stuff it all back in the box. I think that what I have seen, and particularly in Houston and Texas, has been very positive in this respect, in that I am personally aware of a good many people from other religious traditions who come to events at now the Turquoise Center, but in earlier versions when there was not such a fine facility, and have met with Muslims and have said, we can share this, and on travels to see there is an openness to appreciation of other people's faiths without saying, well, I must believe that, or I must convert you to that. That has created an atmosphere in which people can share their views honestly and openly without feeling like they're either being oppressed or they're wanting to oppress others for feeling different. Well, I'll tell you how I first became aware of the schools in a dramatic way. I was visiting in Urfa, and we were up high on an up floor of a hotel. And I looked out over the city, which is mostly low setting, and there were, I believe, 3 rather tall buildings. And I asked the person who was guiding us there, Mr. Mohammed Jetton, what are those buildings? He says, those are our schools. And that day we visited those schools, and I was really impressed by the modernity of them, just that this was, and then began to ask questions and to see that the students there were excelling. Some were going to American universities, to European universities, to the University of Turkey, and seeing how important how successful this was. Of course, charity is a basic principle of Islam, and so in expanding that beyond just in your neighborhood to other countries, I think that is an example where Hizmet'e is exemplifying one of the basic principles of Islam, and that's all quite positive, and I'm happy for it. And I have seen some of the fountain of that in Istanbul, but it's also important to recognize that charity is important, but it should be a short-term thing, and so it's more important to work for changes that can make charity less necessary. So you educate people so that they will not need charity. Here we say it's a good thing to work in soup kitchens, but it's better to work for situations and so people don't need the soup kitchens. I think opening schools is one of the most positive things that the Hizmet'e movement does, of those that I am aware of. That does not rule out the need for charity. People fall into situations, particularly in situations of disasters and immediate needs, where charity will save lives. And I'm by no means opposed to charity, and I contribute to charities that I think are the ones that are most worthy. But I'll just make the point that the long-term effects of the Hizmet'e movement are much more likely to come through education and through spreading through business activities and banking and things of that sort, to facilitate the rise of economic independence in a number of places is more beneficial than charity, without thinking that charity is not a good thing. Many people are frightened by things different from themselves. And one of the secrets of religious fundamentalism and also political fundamentalism is to stay within your shell. just don't interact with anybody else, because some people we know have interacted with other people and they've changed their minds. They have changed in different kinds of ways. And so say that as long as you keep your blinders on, you'll be just fine. When you open yourself up to someone else, there's always the possibility that you will not convert them and that you may be changed somewhat in the process. And that can be very frightening to people. We know that in Christian fundamentalist communities and also in Islam, there's not just talking with people who are not Muslims, but talking with people who are the wrong kind of Muslims and the wrong kind of Christians. And I've studied Christian fundamentalism a good bit, and there were Christian groups who would not associate not just with this group, but with anybody that associated with this group. So they was just, try to remain pure, just to draw a circle around and shut other people out. That can be one aspect of it. I think, from what I know about Turkey, and not being an expert or claiming to be an expert there, you can also have a dimension that for members of Hizmet'e to be interacting with people who are not Muslims may seem to people who are in power and have been in power for a long time as a way to gain greater acceptance in the world and to gain influence and power in Turkey. And that can be not simply for religious reasons or even for secular reasons, but just can be a threat to people's position. And that could be one aspect.